Welcome everybody to this MySQL Shell for DBA session here at Percona Live. So today we're going to see how a DBA, a MySQL DBA, can use MySQL Shell for which task and how to use it. First slide is the safe harbor statement. So a slide that you are already familiar when you follow Oracle MySQL sessions, right? So I'll give you some time to read it. And we can start with the presentation first. So first, who am I? So my name is Frédéric Descamps. I am known as Le Fred or on Twitter. So if you want to follow me, to ask me questions or to know more about MySQL and new stuff, you can just follow me on Twitter. I am also a MySQL evangelist, meaning that I'm working for the MySQL community team here in Oracle. I am managing MySQL for a long time. So the first version I ever installed was MySQL 3.20. I'm a DevOps believer. So if you have also questions about DevOps and MySQL world, just reach me out. I'm always happy to answer. I'm living in Belgium and I have a blog where you can find a lot of information related to MySQL, which is lefred.be. So MySQL Shell, a new tool. It's new, but not that new now because it's around for some time already. You may have been familiar with it, but maybe not everybody. So if you are still using the old MySQL client, I really encourage you to test MySQL Shell. So MySQL Shell, it's an interactive JavaScript, Python, or SQL interface, meaning that you can switch between these three modes that supports development and administration for the MySQL server and the components of it. So meaning that you can use the MySQL Shell like you are using the old client, but you can do much more. You can do document store with the X protocol, right? And stuff like that. We won't go into document store today. There are other sessions on that you can find on my blog or on SlideShare and so on. So today we're going to focus on more administration tasks and other tasks that the DBA has to do and how the shell can help him, right? So we're going to see all that but to have more information about the shell, right? MySQL Shell provide interactive and batch operation. Batch operation are very interesting for people doing DevOps stuff, right? We're going to see also just a bit of that. Document and relational models. This is what I said earlier. So if you want to do document store, so store JSON and work with JSON documents directly in MySQL, it's possible using MySQL Shell. You can do CRUD operation. So with the MySQL Shell, you can also query the database and use the data in MySQL without one single line of SQL. This is also possible. And it has all the format supported. And like I said, it supports the classic protocol. What's the standard protocol? The one that listens to 3306 by default, but also the X protocol, more advanced, that is listening by default on 33060. But the shell can do much more. So this is an overview of what the shell can do. So as you can see, shell has a lot of features and we can use to upgrade from 5.7 to 8.0. We can use it. It's a nice GUI, nice command line, better than much more, I would say, fancy and fun to work with than the classic MySQL client. I will show you that. You can change the prompt. So as I said, we have the three mode, but it's also very powerful for other operations like dump and load, like import stuff, and we're going to see all that. So the first thing when you want to use the shell, it's how to start it and set up your environment, right? So let's have a look how we can do that. So the first thing is to install the shell. The shell, you will the package is called MySQL Shell. You have it for many distributions. You have it also for multiple operating systems and all that kind of stuff. The latest version as we speak now is 8.025. And even if you use an older version of MySQL, I encourage you to use the latest shell. So to start with the beautiful interface, right? You you can change the prompt. There are different prompts available when you install the shell directly, and they are located depending of your distribution, but on Linux, they are in user share MySQL sh prompt, and there is a panel of different prompts there you can test. So here, there is one I want to use, and as you can see, I copy it in my home directory as a prompt.json in the .mysql sh folder, and this is how it looks like when I connect, when I start it. Because when I started, I'm not connected. This is the difference between MySQL Shell and MySQL classic client, right? With the client, when you started, you were already connected. You had to connect to a host, right? And in this case, you can start it and you are not connected. You are in the shell. Then from the shell, you can connect. You can connect directly from the command line. You can do whatever you want. So some tips or some configuration I always like to do when I'm using MySQL Shell, it's to enable the history autosave. So meaning that all the commands I will type in my shell will be saved in my history, and give increase a bit the history. I increase it usually to 5,000 entry. If you want to switch between the modes in the shell, you can do /py to go to Python, /gs to go to JavaScript, /SQL to go in SQL mode. By default, if you don't configure anything, you will be in JavaScript mode. If you prefer that every time you use the shell, you are in SQL mode, you can also set up an option for that. And this option, it's called default mode, right? So you do shell.options.setPersist default mode SQL. So easy. Now we have a nice SQL shell where you can start to work with, right? So now, like the presentation, it's about the DBA task and the shell, how the shell can use the MySQL DBAs. So first thing to do, it's what does a MySQL DBA do? We need to define some tasks. And I've chosen 5 tasks that are, I would say, the most common for DBAs. The first thing is to deploy the architecture, right? Or at least explain what and how to deploy the architecture to operators if the DBA is not the one that deploys the architecture, right? But it has something to say about how to deploy it and what to deploy, right? This is the first task. The second task is to prepare upgrades. Most task of the DBA is to prepare upgrades between versions, right? The third task is to do dump and load data. As a DBA, sometimes you say, okay, could you copy that data from this host to that host? Could you load that data to test in this development environment? Could you do this and that? I need a copy of the data, a logical copy of this table. Can you help me on that? So the DBA can do that and is one of the tasks the DBA has to do, right? Another task is to manage users. Most of the time, it's the DBA who create the users that can connect to the database, and it's the DBA that also grant the privileges. And finally, maybe the most important one, and the one I would say that the DBA has to do daily, it's to understand the workload. So what's my database doing? What's the application doing with the database? And how can I improve stuff? And do I have something to improve? So like I said, the first part is this deploying architecture. To deploy architecture, what we use the MySQL Shell admin API. So what's that? The admin API, it's an API that allows the DBA or the user that uses the admin API to configure and manage Inodb cluster and Inodb replica sets, and among other things he can do with the admin API, right? So the admin API, it's available using the DBA global object in the shell, and from there you can do a lot of stuff. So the use of the admin API allows to deploy architecture much easier than usual. So you no need to configure stuff, to copy stuff and stuff like that. And much secure, because as it does it very well and very, let's say, controlled way, it's much better and secure to deploy stuff without breaking anything, right? It also, the Inodb API also include configuration, so no need for you to configure anything manually. It also do checks. Is this data, for example, is this data on this machine compatible with the data that it's in a cluster if you want to join that cluster and stuff like that. And it also do automatic data provisioning for you. So meaning you have a machine, you want to add it in a replication stream. Is it possible? Yes, even if it's a, let's say, a machine that you just install from scratch without data, it's all possible within the shell. So of course, like everything the shell can do, right? This in-min API calls can be done interactively. This is what a lot of people do, at least the first time. But also you can do it from the command line or from a script. So because of this, it's possible to use all these command line calls in a configuration management tool, for example, like Puppet, Chef, Ansible, or whatever. So you can do all that directly using the shell. This is quite very nice to do. And finally, the new MySQL operator for Kubernetes also used the MySQL shell to do all its tasks. So it's, as you can see, MySQL shell, it's very powerful. So let's have a look to some in-min API example call, right? Interactive. So here we have, I'm splitting the screen between Inodb cluster and the Inodb replica set, right? So first thing to do, so we are in the shell in a JavaScript mode. We want to connect to one server. In this case, I will connect to MySQL 1. So I do \c, the user and the host. And as you can see, it doesn't ask me a password. So meaning that are already connected to it and I saved, because you can store the password if you want or not. Then for a cluster, I just create an object cluster and I will put in that object the result of DBA create cluster and I give a name. So the method of the DBA, so in-min API object, it's create cluster. If I would have done a replica set instead of a cluster, I would have done create replica set. So what's the big difference between these two, Inodb cluster and replica set? We have a dedicated track during Percona Live from Kenny Grip about MySQL database architecture. But if you haven't seen it yet, Inodb cluster, it's a full automated HA solution for MySQL with that guarantees all the automatic failover and no data lost and stuff like that. The replica set, it's something like the old replication, the known asynchronous replication. So this one, it's also kind of an architecture where you have one replication source and several replicas, but they are linked by asynchronous replication, meaning the failover is not automatic and somebody needs to do that, or an external script or an operator need to do this this switch in case there is an issue or not. But so this is to create something more like the old asynchronous replication setup. So then we can, so we have MySQL 1 that is configured and it's started as a cluster or as a part of a replica set. And then we want to say, oh, we want to configure MySQL 2 also. So how we do it? We do configure instance for Inodb cluster, configure replica set instance for replica set. what does that do? It's checking the configuration, check if GTIDs are enabled, for example, check if there is something, some information missing, some variables that need to be defined and stuff like that. And it will all do that for you and change the configuration directly and of the instance and restart it if needed. But it will ask you if it needs to restart or not the instance. All that it's using set persist. If you are familiar with that in MySQL 8, so we have set persist to persist configuration variable without having to modify the files manually, the configuration file manually. So when it's configured, we want to add it to the cluster. So we do add instance, or in the replica set, what we do add instance to. But this time we call the add instance method of or from a replica set object. Before it was from a cluster object. So as you can see, it's just some methods: create a replica set or create a cluster, configure it, add an instance. And then when all it's installed and finished, you can also bootstrap MySQL router. So MySQL router will create user to monitor everything it needs to be able to connect to them. It will also know all the situation of the cluster of the replica set by connecting to the metadata that it has. And it's very, very easy to do. So as you can see, this is very easy to configure all the stack from the MySQL Shell admin API, right? Of course, other than configure your architecture, you also need to manage it, right? And once again, MySQL Shell admin API provides you all the methods you need to manage your architecture. So this is all the methods that are available. So you can see, you can add an instance, you check an instance state. So you have an instance that you want to add to the cluster. You can see, oh, does it has missing transaction or extra transaction? Will it be compatible with the data set that is running right now in the cluster? Stuff like that, it's possible. You can see, oh, describe my cluster or describe my replica set. You can dissolve it, stop this. You can force quorum, you can list router, region instance, and a lot of stuff. In a DB cluster, you can switch between, switch the primary manually, but you can also change the mode if you have multi-primary or single primary mode and stuff like that. So there is a lot of stuff. And also you want to change the password because you want to change, there is recovery account to do this asynchronous replication when you are in a cluster to just when the machine was off and you add it again to do this recovery process. It has a password, right? An account and a password, and you can change that account whenever you want. Also, this is possible. So there is a lot of things to do. So this part was for the admin API. And the second point that we saw earlier was prepare upgrades. So when we decide, oh, let's move to 8 or inside 8, move to newer version, right? It's possible to use the shell to validate the upgrades to the latest version of MySQL 8 or previous version of MySQL 8. You can define that. So there is another global object, which is util, and it has a method that is called check for server upgrade. So with that, the shell will perform a series of tests and on the server you have specified and see if the upgrade will succeed or if it requires first some modification before you can migrate to 8.0, right? So, so this will check the 5.7 installation, for example, and or 8.0 earlier version, and see how you can upgrade to 8.0. So it will check for legacy issues. It will, of course, you need to run that before. I've seen people running the check after they upgraded, and then they were not that happy, right? Because if there is an issue, you will know after, and this is not the best solution, right? And like I said, always use the latest version of the shell. So this upgrade checker utility, what type of checks does it do? So it will check if there is all temporal type. This is something coming from 5.5, 5.6, and it will check because this won't be supported in 8.0. You need to modify that. So it will check if you don't have some reserve keyword in your tables or column, and check, because if you have some reserve keyword, you will have to quote them or to modify them, but at least you will be warned about that and you will know about that. It will check if you are using UTF-8 MB3, which is obsolete now, and you should use UTF-8 MB4 with MySQL 8.0. And it will check some conflicting names if you are using the MySQL schema to add your own tables, which is never really, let's say, recommended, but it's possible. So it checks that, and it checks if you have some engines that are not supported anymore, and see a lot of tests is doing, right? And more than that, so it's checking all that kind of stuff, but it doesn't scan the full data, right? It checks the metadata and the configuration you have, and it will let you know if there is an issue or not. So if you want to run that, for example, this is from the system, so from the command line, you will do MySQL Shell, and then you do util. So this is from the util global object. Then the method, this method is checks for server upgrade. You connect to one server, so this one is localhost, and you say, I want to go to 8.0.24 from this machine, and I want the output to be a JSON, and this is where you can find the myCNF file for the server. Or you can do that also interactively directly from the shell, and this is how you do it. You do util.ee in JavaScript, util.check for server upgrade, and then you connect. The options are the password, the target version, where is the configuration, and it does it. Or you can just do util check for server upgrade, and it will use the connection you have open in MySQL Shell and try to start from there. So the output of it, you will have all the tests. If you don't do in Json output, this is what you will have. So some text readable output, and it will give you some information, some warnings or some errors. And here you can see it says, oh, you have some variables that are not defined in your configuration file, but the default has changed between version. So take a look at that, right? Also here you can see, oh, there is checking if there is default to 0 in date, which is invalid now, and it will warn you, oh, watch out, there is some column here that has default 0 value for a date or date time or timestamp column, which is not recommended. And you have all that information, then you can work on that before doing the upgrade. So this is a very useful tool that I really recommend you to do. So this was the second point of the DBA daily task or usual task. The other one is dump and load, right? Logical dump and load of the data. So this logical dumps, if you don't forget that if you just want to copy data from one server to another one, you can use always the clone, which is integrated in the admin API. But here we are talking about logical dumps, right? And so if you want to do logical dumps for backups, for migration, to change data in development environment and so on, it's possible using, you need logical dumps to do that, right? So MySQL Shell, once again, provides, and this time really amazing tool that relegates completely all the competitors far behind. So when I mean competitors, I mean programs to do logical dumps. So bye-bye MySQL dump, bye-bye MySQL pump, bye-bye MyDumper, and if there are others, you can tell them bye-bye to all of them, because the utility in MySQL dump, so in MySQL Shell, dump and load are really crazy for that. So welcome MySQL Shell load and dump. I really encourage you to test it and to use this more than the usual MySQL dump. So there are three types of dump that we can do. So dump an instance, so we will dump the full instance, dump a schema, so we will dump a full schema, or dump a table or multiple tables only, right? So all these dump are taken in parallel. So this is very nice. And you will see that we can load them also in parallel. So it's wonderful. But also it has other benefits, like you can dump to remote storage. For example, you can remote to OCI object store. You have a progress, and you can track the progress of the dump or of the load. There is compatibility for people that wants to move to MDS, so you can check for the compatibility of your data and make modification if you want. You have a resume and reset. You have you can add a rate limitation. So if you see that this is hammering too much your system, you can slow down. You can use compression, and you can also do, when you take a dump, you can do on the fly some changes, like create invisible primary keys. So this is wonderful. If you decide to say, oh, I want to take a dump to migrate to MDS, but and on MDS I want to enable HA where primary keys are mandatory, I will do this, and you can enable the creation of this invisible primary key. So for your application, there is no change at all, but at least you know that you will have primary keys invisible in MDS. I always recommend people to use primary keys, and if you have none, please use invisible primary keys, even locally if you're not on the cloud or whatever. Inodb will be very happy, and replication too. Then you can say, oh, I want to force Inodb, so you take a dump on some other engines, but you want that the dump says this will be Inodb only. You can do ignore missing primary keys, skip invalid accounts, and so on. A lot of stuff to do, like strip restricted grants, meaning that, for example, if you go on the cloud and in MDS, there is some grants that user are not don't have, right? So you can say, oh, I want to dump my user also, but if there are some privileges that the user have and are not available in the cloud, please remove them. So don't give me an error on that. So when you have done all this, so you have three methods to create a dump, but you have only one method to load, which is the load method. And this one, because it will know what type of load it has to do with the dump information, right? So, and here again, you can do, of course, it's in parallel, but there are other parameters that are supported to give you the best experience, or what you need the most. For example, you can say, oh, I want every time after I've loaded all my dump, I want to run analyze tables, or I just want to run analyze tables on the table that have histograms. That's possible. I want to change the character set. I want, if the dump was made without primary keys and without forcing primary keys, but you still are missing primary keys then, but you want to have primary keys, you can at that time only add them. This is possible too. You can also defer the secondary indexes. You can show progress. You can skip binary log. You can do a lot of stuff with it. So it's very, very powerful. So take a look at this output. So this is something I run myself, right? So which is important here compared to other stuff that also, other tool that can also do in parallel, right? There is some tool that can do, for example, the dump in parallel, but not the load in parallel, or it can do the load in parallel if there are multiple schema or multiple tables. Look in this. So we have one table of 65 gigabytes, one single table, right, in one schema. and it was loaded in 3 minutes, 17 seconds, using the dump. So this is very fast for it's Inodb, so this is very cool, right? So, and also, like I said, it has all included to help people to migrate to MySQL database service on OCI. So if you want to migrate to OCI, this is the easiest way to do it. It's to use MySQL Shell dump and load. So now let's see the next task for our nice MySQL DBA. It's users and privileges, right? So the user create MySQL accounts and grants and stuff like that. It's also another important task for the MySQL DBA. And yeah, this is one of the stuff. Please, could you add that user that I can access this table, but please make this account valid only for next month, and then that's it. People need to change their password or this or that. There is a lot. And as you know, security is very, very important for MySQL 8, for MySQL in general. And in MySQL 8, we added more feature related to that. And we also added more granular privileges, right? So in MySQL 8, we introduced some new stuff for that. And one of them, it's roles. So we have introduced roles. There is, of course, we have a better authentication method for a plugin to store the password by default, which is caching SHA-2 password, right? We have also common and JSON attributes in the users if we want. We can generate random password and more option regarding the old password. We can have an history and check if the password is not the same as the one before. So and check what's the reuse interval. We can have some requirement, define the policy of the password, but also say, oh, you need the current password when you want to change something, lock time and stuff like that. There is more stuff, a lot to do with the user creation. So if you're not aware of all of that, please refer to the MySQL 8 create user manual page. It has everything you need. So before I continue on this user privilege stuff, I want to show you something and to talk to you about something, which is extending MySQL Shell. So for repetitive or complex tasks, it's also possible to extend the MySQL Shell with plugins. These plugins can be written by you, of course, or you can get them somewhere. And so create user, it's a very good candidate for a plugin, depending on what you need to do, right? So some word of the on plugins. Plugins can be written in Python or in JavaScript. I am doing several plugins for demo or for helping people, and they are mostly written in Python because this is I prefer. I'm very bad in JavaScript. Sorry for the JavaScript guy. Better to not read my code in JavaScript. They are loaded when you start MySQL Shell, so and you can install them locally on your laptop and connect to a remote server. The plugins will be there, right? And it can use local modules if you are using Python and you have some other local modules in Python that you want to use in your shell script. It is completely possible. I already made some demo with, for example, ISBN, where I was giving the ISBN number of a book to add the book as a JSON document into document store from the shell. This is possible. If you're interested, ask me. I can send you to that information. So you can find, like I said, multiple plugins to test and to extend on my GitHub. So github.com, Lefred, MySQL Shell plugins. It's a valid name, right? So one of the of example I wanted to show you related to this user management, user privileges, and plugins is, for example, dumping all grants, all user grants. So you can, there is one plugin, user, and one of the methods is get user grants. And as you can see, this will give you all the creation of the user and the grants of every user you have in the server. So you can then just copy paste them, put them in a file, do whatever you want, and or you can get them all, or just some. The method allows you to also do some search with wildcards and stuff like that. So this is very, very cool to do. And I think it's very useful. Another one, it's for example, to copy user. You say, oh, now we have installed or a new server, or for example, oh, we have created our first instance of MySQL Database Service, so in OCI. I want to make tests with it, but first I want to just copy some of the user that will do the test. You can say, oh, copy the user from this server to that one very easily, right? And if you are using OCI and there are some privilege that you need to strip, it will do it for you directly. So this is quite very easy to do, and you can then copy users. Another example of what the plugin can help you in user management is if you are a very skilled DBA and you want to provide to your junior DBA the possibility to create user without having to remember all the syntax that, it's true, can be sometimes complex and needs to read all the time the manual, or if you want that all the user had the same, are created the same way, right? It is also possible to create like a wizard. For example, I've created here a small demo wizard to do that. So you say, oh, user, create user, and he said, and it's interactive. So he asks you, oh, what's the user account you want? So you add the name. Do you want set the password or just leave it blank and it will be random? Then does the user needs to change its password the first time it connects? Do you want to lock the account after 3 failed attempts and stuff like that? So here I left it blank. The user needs to change the password. I let the default, and it has to change after 3 failed attempts. And this is the generated password that you have to send to the user, and then it will be able to connect and to change his password, right? You can also say, oh, this time there is a small parameter that if you enable it, it will also show you the output, the syntax of the created statement. So in this case, we're going to create a user, we add one. So we put the password ourselves. Does it need to change his password? No. Do you want to be locked? We said yes. And this is what the create statement looks like. So this is just an example, of course, but this is how the shell can help you to manage users and add some privileges and stuff like that. Now, you can, in the script, in the plugins I've done, I provide as a test or for people to test, there is one also show authentication method that gives you all the users and which authentication method they are using. So, for example, you can see that on this server, the old way to save the password and to authenticate the authenticate plugin, which is the MySQL native password. You can see there are still 20 users using it, and the new one it's only 6, right? So we can see that very easy, and then we can check which one they are and ask them to change. We can also do, oh, remember I create some users and they say, oh, some password need to expire. And for example, I can say, oh, show me the password expires soon. And it will give me here, okay, this user, John Doe, has a password that will expire in 10 days. So you can have the list of all the password that will expire soon. And there is also a possibility to see without the soon, all the expired password we have. So this is one of the points that we can do with the shell. So, and finally, the last topic that MySQL DBA has to do almost daily, it's to understand the workload. So what's happening on the server? So in MySQL 8.0, we have worked a lot in the observability. So, and we have improved information schema, performance schema, sys schema. They are all constant evolution. Every release, there is something new in there, and that helps us to have, helps the DBA to have more, to know what's going on and to have more details of what's happening, right? And but unless you deal with this scheme every day, sometimes I agree it could be complicated. There is so much information there that you can sometimes lose your way, right? And but there again, the shell can be helpful for you. You can search only once what you are looking for, and try to get that information and add this in a plugin for the shell, and then everybody will be able to use it in your organization, right? So I have created already several plugins that provide useful information about the workload, right? And so there is mostly two plugins with a lot of methods, with our the check plugin and the Inodb plugin. So with the check plugin, you can see here we have a bunch of methods like get the amount of DDL, so get the bin logs, so how much bin logs we have, and what's the IO in the bin logs, but much more. Give me the queries that does full table scan, give me the table without primary key, and much more information. For example, you can see also the size of transaction. This is read from the binary logs to really have the amount that when you use replication that will be transferred and stuff like that. So we have there is a lot of information here, and also the same for Inodb. Do you have fragmented tables? What's the checkpoint age and stuff like that? So you can get a lot of information. So if you don't know where to find that in sys, performance, information schema, use one of these methods or create your own methods to do whatever you want. It's much easier for you to use. So let's have a look at an example of this. For example, check workload info. So we can see here, okay, on this machine, we have the query write that is read at 100%, and the SB test that it's write at 100%. So this is, and we can see that the workload of the server, it's in 99.98% of writes, only writes on this machine. We can check the amount of DDL, for example, and here you have an information how many DDL have been done since the restart of the server. Just for information to understand what the server is doing and what MySQL it's spending time with, right? Checkpoint, what's a checkpoint? So you can see, oh, get checkpoint age, and it gives you, oh, Inodb is using 2 files of 48 megabytes, and the checkpoint age now, it's as on 3.18 megabytes of the 96, so only 2% of the transaction log I use. So we can see not problematic now here, right? So if you want to get a lot of more information on all these methods, I point you to this to the wiki on the GitHub for the MySQL Shell plugins repository, and you will find there an example of each of them, right? Also, something that the DBA has to do, it's to find the slow query and inefficient queries, right? So, for example, we want to say, oh, give me the full table, the query that does the most full table scan. So in this, when you use this method and you don't put a limit, so in between the brackets, it will show you the top one, and then it will provide, it will also ask you interactively some questions. So if we do this without any parameters, you can see, okay, this is the one that does full table scans, right? And then it tells you, okay, do you want to have an explain of it? You can say yes, no. here we say yes, we have the explain. Oh, do you want the explain in JSON format? Yes, and you have the explain. Oh, do you want to have the tree format? Yes. Do you want to have also explain analyze run of it? You can say yes. So you can have this interactive shell plugins that provide you a lot of information, very easy as a DBA to use. Also, something that we have in MySQL 8 that people are missing when they use MySQL 8 is the old profiler, for example, right? If you remember query profiler, it's something that we don't have anymore when we did show profile, right? You can recreate your own profiler or use this one as an example or update it to do that within the shell. So as you can see, you can start the profiling, then you do the query, and then you ask the profiling of the query, and it gives you, okay, this is all the queries that were done in this session, which one do you want to profile? And it shows you different color, the one he has profile information, the one he has not enough profile information because it was not enabled yet. So you can see, and then you have all the profile like you had usually. And you can say something different in this is say, oh, I want to get the profile of another query. So not from mine, but from another foreground thread. It's possible. So you can say, oh, I want this, and then you can enter it and see all that information too. So this also helps the DBA to understand what's going on and what is MySQL doing. Something which I like also to work with and to deal and to fix is the query execution plan. So this is most, I think at least, important part of the MySQL DBA's job. It's to control this query execution plan for the queries. And I made a plugin also for the shell that can give you the query execution plan, the cost of it, and you can save it and compare it. So you can compare between different versions if the query execution plan has changed, for example, and you can see the difference. So this is very, very interesting. So as you can see here, for example, you say, okay, I will call the plugin its query execution plan. You run the get. So he asks you, okay, enter a query. So you enter the query here, right? And he says, oh, the cost of this query, it's 2.40. So if you want to have, then he asks you, do you want to have the explain output? You can say yes or no. Do you want the JSON format, the tree format? Do you want to run explain analyze of it? You can answer. And if you say yes, you will see it there directly in the shell. And then he says, oh, the last query execution plan saved for this query on, here it was the 3 of March, had also a cost of 2.04. Do you want to compare it with another one? Here, in this case, I just say yes to see, and we can see that we have already 3 query execution plan, and we can see that we have 2 for 8023. So maybe in between we have changed some indexes or something like that. We had one for 8021, and then you say, oh, I want to compare it with the one that has a cost of 636. And again, it gives you the difference query execution plan of the 2 queries. So you can then understand what's going on when you do a new one and you see, oh, no, it's much slower. The cost is slower. What's happening? So you can verify all that. So this plugin, so once again, the shell helps you to, as a DBA, to find that information, right? So you can get the code here, and pull requests are welcome, of course. So you can go on GitHub, and just something more control, just an extra here. If sometimes the DBA needs to file with the configuration change, right? So who changed this information on my server? Why is this like that now? So there is a config plugin that helps you to get information of which data, which variables are not using the default globally or session, which table are persisted, which variables have been persisted, and give me more information of a variable. Everything that MySQL has for a variable, it can give it to you. So we can see here, for example, if we use get variable info for max connection, it gives you, oh, this was compiled, so this is the default, and this is the minimum value, the max value, when it was set by who, it's a default, so nothing changed, and the value it's 151. But you can also say, oh, I want to know all the persisted variable on the system. And here you have the information of all the variables that have been persisted and changed by who, at what time, and the value and where it comes from. It's always persisted because this is what we are looking for, right? And once again, get variable info, and I will take one of the variable. I want to have a vertical output and not a column output, and we can see that, for example, Inodb FT min token size has been persisted. It's in that file. The minimum value is 0, the max value is 16, the current value is 2. It has been done in 2020 in June by Giuseppe on localhost. So you can see you can do a lot of stuff with the shell. It helps the DBA to do whatever it needs to do. So thank you very much for following this session. So if you have any question, I will be now answering them live. So, and if you don't have time to ask now, or if you don't dare, just ask me on my blog or on Twitter. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.